Some people don't wait for help. They wait for someone who was meant to find them. The rain came down in steady sheets that night, turning the empty two-lane road into a ribbon of black glass stretching through miles of silent pine forest, and Caleb Mercer drove slowly, his worn pickup rattling with every mile as if it too was tired of carrying memories it couldn't shake. Beside him, Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, ears sharp, amber eyes scanning the darkness with a focus that never truly rested. The kind of awareness only came from years of training and something deeper no one could quite explain. And just as Caleb adjusted his grip on the wheel, thinking only about finding a place to park before the storm got worse, Rex let out a sudden bark, sharp and deliberate, the kind that didn't ask for attention but demanded it. And before Caleb could react, the dog leaned forward, muscles tense, staring into the curtain of rain ahead like he had seen something that didn't belong, forcing Caleb to ease off the gas until the headlights cut through the storm and revealed a figure standing just off the shoulder of the road. An old man, thin and still, barefoot on the wet gravel, as if he had been there longer than the storm itself, his coat hanging loose, his face turned slightly upward like he was listening to something beyond the sound of rain. And for a moment Caleb hesitated, not out of fear, but out of something harder to name. A quiet instinct that told him this wasn't just another stranger needing a ride. Yet Rex let out a low sound from his chest. Not a growl, but something older, almost urging. And that was enough. Caleb pulled over, the tires crunching softly as the engine idled. And when he stepped out into the cold, the rain soaked through his jacket in seconds. But the old man didn't move, didn't flinch, only slowly turned his head and met Caleb's eyes with a calm that felt out of place in the middle of a storm. "You took your time," the man said, his voice steady, almost certain, as if this meeting had been scheduled long before. Either of them arrived, and Caleb felt something shift inside him, something small but undeniable, the kind of feeling he used to trust before life taught him not to, and without asking questions he couldn't yet form, he stepped closer, offering a hand the old man didn't need, but accepted anyway. And as they walked toward the truck, Rex circled once around the man's legs, nose low, breathing him in like he was confirming something only he understood, then settled beside Caleb without another sound. But his ears never dropped, not even for a second. And as they drove away from the roadside, the storm seemed to follow them, the headlights carving through darkness that felt thicker than before, and somewhere in the distance, just beyond the rhythm of rain on metal, there was a silence that didn't belong to the night, a silence that waited, patient and still, like something had finally begun. The road stretched on for another mile before the old man finally spoke again, his voice low but clear above the steady hum of the engine and the soft hiss of rain against the windshield. "You kept him close," he said, glancing toward Rex, who sat alert and unmoving, eyes fixed not on the man, but somewhere just beyond him, as if listening to something deeper than words, and Caleb nodded slightly, his hands steady on the wheel. "He has been with me longer than most things," he replied, his tone quiet, careful, like a man who had learned not to offer more than necessary. And the old man gave a small smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Good," he murmured, "because some doors do not open for those who walk alone." And the sentence hung in the air, strange but not unwelcome, like a piece of a conversation that had started long before this moment. And as they turned off the main road onto a narrow gravel path, the world seemed to dim, the trees growing closer, their branches bending inward like they were guarding something hidden from the rest of the world. And Caleb noticed the way Rex shifted beside him, his posture tightening, his ears flicking at intervals too precise to be random, the same pattern he used when tracking something buried or unseen. And it made Caleb's chest tighten just slightly, not fear exactly, but awareness, the kind that sharpened every sound and stretched every second, until at last the truck rolled to a stop in front of a small house set back from the road, its wooden frame worn by time, but still standing with a quiet stubbornness, a single porch light flickering as if it had been waiting too long to be noticed. And the moment the engine cut, the silence rushed in, thick and complete, swallowing the storm as though it had never existed beyond the edge of the property. And Caleb stepped out first, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, the air carrying a faint metallic scent mixed with something older, something like dust that had not been disturbed in years. and Rex followed close behind. But instead of scanning the yard like he usually would, he moved directly toward the house, stopping at the base of the porch steps, his body rigid, head tilted just enough to catch a sound Caleb could not hear. And then the dog let out a soft whine, not of fear, but of recognition. And that was when Caleb felt it too. Not a sound exactly, but a presence. Subtle and steady, like a rhythm just beneath the surface of everything around them. And when he turned back, the old man was already climbing the steps, slower than before but certain, as if every movement was guided by something he trusted completely. "Come inside," he said without looking back, and Caleb followed, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by something quieter, something that felt almost like obligation. And the door opened with a long, low creak, revealing a dim interior where shadows settled into corners like they had grown there over time. And as Caleb crossed the threshold, Rex hesitated for the first time that night, his paw hovering just above the wooden floor, ears pulled back slightly, as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. And then, slowly, he stepped inside. But instead of moving forward, he turned his head toward the far wall, staring at a section of wood that looked no different from the rest, yet somehow carried a weight that pressed gently against the room. And Caleb followed that gaze, his breath slowing, his instincts sharpening, because whatever Rex had found, whatever had been waiting here, it was not just part of the house, it was the reason they had been brought to it. The door closed behind them with a soft but final sound, and the house seemed to settle as if it had been waiting for that exact moment. The air inside cooler than it should have been, carrying a faint scent of aged wood and something metallic that lingered just beneath the surface. And Caleb stood still for a second, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light cast by a single lamp in the corner, its glow weak but steady, revealing a space that felt both lived in and forgotten at the same time. A narrow table, a worn armchair, shelves lined with objects that had not been touched in years, yet nothing looked abandoned, only paused, as if time had stepped away but intended to return. And the old man moved slowly across the room, his steps measured, his hand brushing lightly against the back of the chair as though grounding himself in something familiar. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, though his voice carried no urgency, only quiet certainty. And Caleb nodded, setting his damp jacket over a nearby hook. But his attention did not stay on the room for long, because Rex had already begun to move, his paws silent against the wooden floor as he traced a careful path along the wall, nose low, breathing in short, deliberate bursts, until he stopped again at the same spot he had noticed before, a section of wall no different in color or shape, yet somehow heavier in presence. And this time the dog let out a low, steady sound, not loud enough to alarm, but enough to signal that whatever was there mattered. And Caleb stepped closer, his hand hovering just inches from the wood, feeling something he could not quite explain, a faint vibration, so subtle it could have been imagined, yet too consistent to ignore, like a distant echo repeating beneath layers of silence. And behind him, the old man watched without surprise, without question, as if this moment was unfolding exactly as it should. "He hears it, does he not?" the man said quietly, and Caleb glanced back, his brow tightening slightly. "He hears things most people miss," he replied, and the old man nodded once, slow and certain. "That is why you are here," he said, and the words settled into the room with a weight that made the air feel denser. And for a brief moment, Caleb felt the urge to ask questions, to demand some kind of explanation. But the feeling passed almost as quickly as it came, replaced by something calmer, something that told him not everything needed to be understood right away. And Rex shifted again, this time placing one paw lightly against the wall, holding it there as if testing the surface. His ears angled forward, his entire body aligned with that unseen rhythm beneath the wood. And Caleb mirrored the motion, pressing his palm flat against the same spot. And there it was again, clearer now, a steady pulse, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat measured in long intervals. And it sent a quiet chill through him, not fear, but recognition, the kind that stirred memories he could not fully place. And when he looked back at the old man, he saw something new in his expression, not just calm, but relief, as if a long wait had finally come to an end. "Some things," the man said softly, his voice almost blending into the silence around them, do not belong to time. They belong to the ones who are meant to find them. And as the words faded, the lamp flickered once, casting shifting shadows across the wall, and for a brief second, the surface Caleb touched seemed almost alive, not moving, but holding something just beneath it, something patient, something waiting. And Rex lowered his head slightly, his breath slow and steady, as if he already understood what Caleb was only beginning to feel, that whatever rested behind that wall was not just hidden, it was meant to be discovered, and tonight was the moment it had chosen to be found. Caleb kept his hand against the wall a moment longer, feeling that slow, measured pulse beneath the wood, and the longer he stood there the more it seemed to settle into his awareness, not loud, not demanding, just present, like something that had been waiting patiently for recognition. And when he finally pulled his hand away, the absence of it felt almost noticeable, like stepping out of a rhythm you had unknowingly matched. And Rex lowered his paw at the same time, his gaze lifting to meet Caleb's, steady and certain, as if confirming what needed no words. And behind them the old man moved toward the small stove in the corner, striking a match that flared briefly before settling into a soft, steady flame, the light casting warm tones across the worn wood and pushing back just enough of the shadows to make the room feel less distant, though not entirely safe from whatever quiet presence lingered beneath it. And Caleb exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off a weight he could not quite name. "You knew we would find that," he said, not as a question but as a statement, and the old man stirred a small pot on the stove, the faint scent of broth rising into the air, simple and grounding. "I knew someone would," he replied, his voice calm. "But not everyone can hear it, and not everyone would stay long enough to listen." And Caleb watched him for a moment, studying the lines in his face. The way his movements carried no hesitation, only a quiet sense of completion, and it struck him then that the man was not surprised by anything that had happened, not the storm, not the meeting, not even Rex's reaction, and that realization settled deeper than any explanation could have, because it suggested something larger than coincidence, something guided. And Rex shifted again, this time moving away from the wall and circling once through the room before settling near the doorway. But his ears remained angled back toward that same spot, as if whatever rested behind it had not finished speaking. And Caleb stepped closer to the table, running his fingers along its surface, feeling the grooves left by years of use, wondering how long the man had lived here alone with whatever secret lay hidden just a few inches behind that wall. "Why keep it hidden?" Caleb asked quietly, and the old man paused, the spoon resting still in his hand. "Because some things are not meant to be found early," he said, turning slightly, his eyes reflecting the soft firelight, "and some things are not meant to be found by just anyone." And the answer carried no mystery in its tone, only truth, simple and unguarded. And Caleb nodded faintly, accepting it without argument, because something in him already understood, even if he could not fully explain why. And outside the rain had begun to soften, the steady drumming easing into a lighter rhythm against the roof, as if the storm itself was beginning to pass. And inside the house the air grew warmer, the quiet deepening into something almost peaceful. Yet beneath it all that subtle pulse remained, steady and patient, marking time in a way that did not belong to clocks or minutes. And as Caleb sat down across from the old man, the bowl of warm broth placed gently in front of him, he realized that whatever had drawn him here was not finished, not yet, because the night still held something more, something waiting just beyond the edge of understanding. And for the first time in a long while, he did not feel the need to leave before morning came. The warmth of the broth spread slowly through Caleb's chest, grounding him in a way he had almost forgotten. The simple act of sitting at a table, sharing food in silence, something most people would not think twice about. Yet for him it felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a memory that no longer belonged to his life. And across from him the old man ate with steady, unhurried movements, his eyes occasionally lifting toward Caleb as if measuring something deeper than conversation. And for a while neither of them spoke, the only sound the soft crackle of the small fire and the faint rhythm that still pulsed somewhere behind the wall, quiet but constant, like a second heartbeat beneath the house. And Rex remained near the doorway, his body relaxed but never fully at rest, his ears shifting at intervals that followed that same hidden pattern, and every so often his gaze returned to Caleb, as if checking that he too could feel it, that he had not dismissed it as imagination. And when the bowls were empty, the old man set his aside gently, his hands resting for a moment on the table, fingers still, and then he spoke again, his voice softer now, almost reflective. "I built this place a long time ago," he said, his eyes drifting toward the wall without turning his head. "Back when I still believed I could hold on to things that mattered." And Caleb listened, leaning back slightly in his chair, the weight of the night settling into something quieter, more personal. "But time has a way of taking what it wants," the man continued, "and leaving behind only what it cannot carry." And there was no bitterness in his tone, only acceptance, the kind that came after years of understanding something too large to fight. And Caleb nodded faintly, because he knew that truth in his own way had lived it in different places, under different skies, yet the feeling was the same. And the old man looked at him again, this time with a clearer intent. "You have lost things too," he said, not asking, simply stating, and Caleb's jaw tightened just slightly, not in resistance but in recognition. Enough to stop asking why. He replied, and the old man gave a small, knowing nod, as if that answer had been expected, and for a moment the room grew still again, the quiet deepening into something almost sacred. And then the man reached beneath the table, his hand disappearing briefly before returning with a small, worn object, a key, old and darkened with age, its surface marked by faint engravings that caught the firelight in subtle patterns. And he placed it gently on the table between them, the soft sound of metal against wood carrying more weight than it should have. And Caleb's eyes dropped to it, his brow furrowing slightly. "That belongs to you now," the man said, his voice steady but softer than before. And Caleb looked up, confusion flickering across his face. "I have only been here for an hour," he said quietly, and the old man smiled, not amused but certain. "You have been on your way here much longer than that," he replied, and the words settled deeply, not because they explained anything, but because they felt true in a way Caleb could not dismiss. And Rex stood slowly, stepping closer to the table, his nose lowering toward the key, inhaling once before lifting his head, his posture calm, almost approving. And Caleb reached out, his fingers closing around the metal, feeling its weight, its cool surface warming slightly against his skin. And somewhere behind the wall, the pulse shifted, just slightly, as if acknowledging the moment, as if something long dormant had begun to stir, not fully awake, but no longer waiting in silence. Caleb held the key in his palm a moment longer, feeling its weight settle into something more than metal, something that seemed to carry time within it. And as his fingers curled around it, the faint pulse behind the wall shifted again, no longer distant, but slightly stronger, as if responding to the simple act of being claimed. And he lifted his gaze toward the old man, searching for something that would make sense of it. But the man only watched quietly, his expression calm, almost relieved. "Look," and behind him the old man remained silent, offering no instruction, no guidance, only trust. And that trust settled into Caleb like something earned, not given lightly. And with careful pressure, he slid the key into the hidden slot, the metal fitting with a precision that felt inevitable. And for a second nothing happened, the house holding its breath around him. And then there was a soft click, not loud but final, followed by a shift beneath his hand, the wall giving just slightly, enough to reveal that it had never truly been a wall at all, but a door, sealed and waiting. And Rex stepped forward immediately, his nose close to the opening, his ears forward, his posture alert but calm. And Caleb pulled gently, the wood moving with a low, steady sound, revealing a narrow space beyond, dark but not empty. And from within came a faint glow, not bright, but enough to suggest something more than shadow. And the pulse changed again, no longer distant or hidden, but present. Within that space, like a heartbeat finally uncovered, and Caleb felt it echo through him, not as fear, but as recognition, the same quiet certainty that had followed him since the moment Rex first barked into the night. And when he turned back toward the old man, he saw that the man had not moved, his eyes resting on Caleb with a calm that carried no doubt, only completion, as if whatever had begun that night was now unfolding exactly as it was meant to. And for the first time, Caleb understood that opening the door was not the end of something hidden, but the beginning of something that had been waiting for him all along. The opening revealed more than darkness. It revealed depth, a narrow passage carved into the structure of the house itself, descending slightly as if it followed the natural shape of the earth beneath it. And the faint glow Caleb had seen was coming from further inside, a soft, steady light that did not flicker like fire but pulsed gently in time with that same rhythm he had felt through the wall. And for a moment he simply stood there, one hand still on the edge of the hidden door, listening. Not just with his ears, but with something quieter, something deeper that had been stirred awake since the moment Rex first reacted on the road. And beside him Rex stepped forward without hesitation, his paws silent as he crossed the threshold, his posture confident, not cautious, as if whatever waited inside was not a threat, but a truth he already understood. And Caleb followed, the wooden floor giving way to a smoother surface beneath his boots, cool and solid, carrying a faint echo with each step that made the space feel larger than it appeared. And as they moved further in, the air shifted, becoming stiller, heavier with a sense of time that had not passed in the same way it did above ground. And the light grew clearer, revealing walls lined not with stone, but with carefully placed wooden beams, aged but intact, as though this space had been built with intention rather than discovered. And at the center of it all, resting on a low platform, was a small chest, simple in design but unmistakably important, its surface marked by the same faint engravings Caleb had seen on the key, patterns that seemed to shift slightly in the soft light, not moving, but drawing the eye in a way that made them feel alive. And the pulse was strongest here, no longer distant or hidden, but steady and present, like a heartbeat finally revealed. And Caleb felt it in his chest, not matching his own but close enough to blur the line between them. And Rex circled the platform once before sitting beside it, his gaze fixed on the chest, calm and certain. And Caleb stepped closer, the air around him thick with something he could not name, something that felt neither strange nor familiar, but deeply personal. And when he reached out, his fingers hovering just above the lid, he paused, not because he feared what was inside, but because he understood that whatever he was about to uncover had been waiting far longer than he had been searching. And behind him, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of the old man's voice, not loud, not urgent, just present. "It does not belong to me anymore," he said, and Caleb turned slightly, though he could not see him from this angle. "It has been waiting for you." And the words settled into the space like a final confirmation, and Caleb exhaled slowly, grounding himself in the moment, before placing his hand fully on the chest, feeling the surface warm beneath his touch, as if it recognized him in return. And with a steady motion, he began to lift the lid, the soft sound of it opening echoing gently through the chamber. And as the light inside shifted, something within responded, not with noise, not with movement, but with a presence that filled the space in a way that could not be measured. And Caleb realized then that, whatever this was, it was never just about what lay inside the chest. It was about the moment of opening it, the moment of becoming the one it had been waiting for all along. As the lid lifted, the soft glow inside the chest grew warmer, spreading across Caleb's hands and up along his sleeves like light that carried weight instead of heat. And for a brief moment he could not see what was inside, only the way the air itself seemed to shift, as if the space had been holding its breath for years and was finally releasing it. And Rex leaned forward slightly, his ears upright, his gaze steady and calm, not startled, not tense, but focused in a way that suggested recognition rather than surprise. And when Caleb's eyes adjusted, he saw that the chest did not hold gold or anything that glittered in the usual sense, but something quieter, something that felt far more deliberate, a bundle of carefully preserved items, wrapped in cloth that had aged but not decayed, each layer folded with intention. And resting on top was a small journal, its leather cover worn smooth by time, the edges softened, the pages within slightly uneven as if they had been turned, often but always with care. And the pulse he had felt before seemed to center itself here, no longer surrounding him, but coming from this very place, steady and calm, like a presence anchored in memory rather than matter. And Caleb reached down slowly, his fingers brushing the cover of the journal, feeling the texture beneath his skin. And the moment he touched it, the rhythm shifted again, aligning just slightly with his own heartbeat, not matching it, but echoing close enough to feel intentional, and he lifted it carefully, the weight lighter than expected, yet somehow carrying more than it should. And as he opened it, the pages revealed lines of handwriting, neat but aged, each word placed with thought rather than haste. And though he had not yet read a single sentence fully, he felt something settle inside him, a quiet understanding that this was not just a record. It was a message, something left behind not for anyone, but for someone specific. And behind him, the old man's voice came again, softer now, almost like it belonged to the space itself rather than the room above. Not everything valuable shines, he said, and Caleb paused, his eyes still on the page. Some things wait until they are needed, and the words carried no explanation, only confirmation, and Rex shifted closer, sitting beside Caleb now, his shoulder brushing lightly against his leg, grounding him in the moment, reminding him that he was not alone in whatever this was. And Caleb turned another page, the faint sound of paper moving, echoing gently in the chamber, and though the words themselves were not yet clear in his mind, the feeling they carried was unmistakable: purpose, patience, and something deeper, something that spoke not to the past, but to what came next. And he realized then that this was never meant to be found quickly, never meant to be uncovered by chance. It had been placed here with intention, protected by time, waiting for the moment when someone would not only find it, but understand it. And as he closed the journal slightly, holding it in both hands, he felt the pulse steady once more, calm and certain, no longer hidden, no longer distant, but present, like a quiet truth that had finally been brought into the light. Caleb held the journal a little tighter, his thumb resting along the edge of the page as if steadying not just the paper, but the weight of what it carried. And for a moment he simply listened, not reading yet, allowing the silence of the chamber to settle around him, because it was no longer empty. It felt full, layered with something that had been built over years of waiting. And Rex remained close, his presence firm and grounding, his breathing slow and even, matching the calm that had replaced the earlier tension. And when Caleb finally lowered his gaze back to the page, he began to read, not quickly, not scanning, but carefully, each word taken in as it was meant to be. And the handwriting spoke in a voice that felt familiar despite never having heard it before, steady, reflective, written by someone who had long ago accepted what they could not change and focused only on what they could leave behind. And as he turned the first page fully, the meaning began to take shape, not as a list of possessions or instructions, but as a story, a life laid out in quiet detail, moments of loss, of patience, of building something not for recognition but for purpose. And Caleb felt his chest tighten slightly, not from discomfort, but from recognition, because the words carried the same tone he had heard in the old man's voice, the same quiet certainty that life was not random, even when it felt that way. And as he read further, he began to understand that the chest did not contain wealth in the way most people would define it, but something far more deliberate, a record of choices, of decisions made in silence, of moments where kindness had been given without expectation. And slowly, piece by piece, the connection formed. This was not just a journal, it was a map, not of places, but of meaning, guiding the one who found it towards something that could not be seen at a glance. And Caleb paused, lifting his eyes slightly, the chamber around him unchanged yet, somehow different now that he understood even a small part of what rested in his hands. And behind him the faint presence of the old man seemed to linger, not moving, not speaking, but still there in a way that felt less physical and more woven into the space itself. And Caleb turned another page, his fingers steady, and there, written more clearly than anything before, was a line that seemed to stand apart from the rest, as if it had been meant to be found at exactly this moment. If you are reading this, then you have already proven what matters. And Caleb felt something shift inside him, something that reached beyond thought, beyond logic, touching a place he had not allowed himself to revisit in years. And he exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible in the stillness. And Rex leaned gently against him, the contact subtle but intentional. And Caleb continued reading, each word now carrying more weight than the last, because it was no longer just a story he was discovering. It was something that was beginning to include him, something that had been written not just to be remembered, but to be continued. And for the first time since stepping into that house, Caleb understood that what he had opened was not an ending. It was an invitation, quiet and patient, waiting for him to decide what he would do with it. Caleb remained still for a long moment after reading that line, his eyes resting on the page but no longer moving across it, because the words had already done what they were meant to do. They had reached him, not as instructions but as recognition, and something inside him shifted quietly, like a door opening in a place he had kept closed for years, and the chamber around him seemed to respond in kind, the faint pulse steady and calm, no longer asking to be noticed, but simply existing, as if its purpose had already been fulfilled. And Rex let out a slow breath beside him, lowering himself to the ground with a quiet certainty that mirrored the stillness settling over Caleb's thoughts. And for the first time since entering the hidden space, Caleb did not feel like an outsider looking in. He felt placed, as if this moment had been shaped with him in mind long before he ever arrived. And he turned another page, slower now, not searching for answers, but allowing them to come as they were meant to. And the writing continued with the same steady voice, speaking of patience, of time, of understanding that not every reward comes in the form expected, and that sometimes the greatest inheritance is not something you take, but something you become responsible for. And Caleb's gaze softened slightly as he read, because he could see it now, the pattern beneath the words, the way every entry pointed not backward to what had been lost, but forward to what could still be carried on. And he realized that the old man had not been preserving memories out of attachment, but out of purpose, building something that would outlast him, something that would find the right hands when the time came. And Caleb exhaled quietly, his grip on the journal loosening just enough to feel natural again. And when he finally looked up from the page, the space around him felt different, not changed, but understood, and he rose slowly to his feet, the movement unhurried, deliberate, and Rex stood with him, his body aligned with Caleb's as if they had made the same decision without speaking it. And Caleb turned slightly, glancing back toward the opening that led to the room above. And though he could not see the old man from where he stood, he felt the presence there, calm and complete, like a chapter that had already reached its final line. And Caleb stepped forward, the journal held firmly in his hand, not as something he had taken, but as something he had accepted. And the faint glow within the chamber softened as he moved away from the chest, not dimming, but settling, as if it no longer needed to call attention to itself. And when he reached the doorway, he paused once more, looking back at the platform, at the chest now resting open and still. And he understood then that nothing here had been hidden out of fear. It had been protected out of intention, waiting for the moment when it would no longer need to remain unseen. And as he stepped back into the main room, the air shifted gently, the quiet presence that had filled the house now, lighter, less weighted. And when his eyes found the old man again, standing exactly where he had been before, there was something different in his expression, not expectation, not even relief, but peace, the kind that comes when something important has been passed on exactly as it was meant to be. And Caleb met his gaze for a brief moment, no words needed, because everything that needed to be understood had already been said without being spoken. And in that silence, something unseen settled into place, quiet and complete, like a promise that had finally been kept. The silence between them lingered, not empty but full, as if the house itself was listening to what had already been understood without words. And Caleb stood there with the journal in his hands, feeling its presence differently now, no longer as something he had discovered, but as something that had chosen him in return. And the old man watched him with a quiet stillness, his shoulders relaxed, his breath steady, as though the weight he had carried for years had finally been set down. And for a moment neither of them moved, the soft glow of the lamp flickering gently against the walls, casting shadows that no longer felt heavy, only calm. And Rex stepped forward, positioning himself beside Caleb once more, his body aligned, his gaze shifting briefly toward the old man before returning to Caleb, as if acknowledging that something had passed between them that did not need explanation. And Caleb finally spoke, his voice low but clear. "You knew this would happen tonight." And the old man's lips curved into a faint, almost invisible smile, not one of surprise, but of quiet confirmation. "Not the night," he replied softly, "only that it would happen when it was meant to." And the answer settled gently, not as a mystery, but as a truth Caleb had already begun to accept, and he nodded once, his grip on the journal steady, his posture no longer uncertain, and the old man took a slow step back, the movement subtle but meaningful, as if creating space for something new to take its place. "Everything here is yours now," he said, his voice carrying no weight of ownership, only release, and Caleb felt that sentence land differently than he expected, not as a gain, not as a possession, but as a responsibility, something that extended beyond the walls of the house, beyond the objects within it, and into something quieter, something that would require more than just understanding. And Rex lowered himself calmly beside Caleb, his presence steady, grounding, as if reminding him that he would not carry it alone. And Caleb glanced around the room, seeing it now not as a stranger would, but as someone who had been invited into its purpose, every worn surface, every quiet corner holding meaning that had been waiting to be seen. And when he turned back to the old man, something had shifted, not in the space, but in the way he saw him. The lines of his figure softer now, less defined, as though the boundary between presence and memory had begun to blur, and Caleb did not question it, did not reach for an explanation, because deep down he understood that some things did not need to be explained to be true, and the old man gave a small nod, the kind that carried finality without sadness. "You will know what to do," he said. And then the room grew still in a different way, not heavy, not quiet, but complete, as if a long-held breath had finally been released, and Caleb stood there for a moment longer, the journal held firmly against him, feeling not overwhelmed, but steady, anchored in something he had not felt in a long time. And when he finally turned toward the door, Rex rising smoothly beside him, he did so without hesitation, because whatever path lay ahead was no longer uncertain. It had already begun the moment he chose to stop on that road, and now it was his to continue. The door opened with a soft creak as Caleb stepped outside, the night air cool and clean after the storm, the scent of wet earth rising from the ground in quiet waves. And for a moment he paused on the porch, the journal held close against his chest, his breath slow, steady, as if the world itself had shifted into a different rhythm, and Rex moved ahead of him, stepping onto the damp gravel with a calm confidence, his ears relaxed now, no longer searching, no longer listening for something hidden, as though whatever had been calling to him had finally been answered. And Caleb glanced back once, just once, toward the doorway behind him, the dim light inside still glowing faintly, but the presence he had felt before was no longer there in the same way, not gone, but complete, like a story that had reached its final page and no longer needed to be told again. And he stepped down from the porch, his boots pressing into the soft ground, each movement grounded, certain, and as he walked toward the truck, he felt it clearly now, not the pulse from before, but something quieter, something that had settled within him instead of around him, a steady awareness that he carried forward with each step. And when he reached the driver's side door, he stopped again, his hand resting lightly against the metal, and he looked out across the land surrounding the house, the trees standing still under the clearing sky, their branches no longer bending under wind, but resting. And there was a sense of space now, not emptiness, but openness, as if the world itself had made room for something new to take shape. And Caleb opened the door, climbing in as Rex settled into the passenger seat, his gaze calm, his posture easy. And when the engine started, the sound did not break the silence. It blended into it, becoming part of the quiet rather than disrupting it. And as the headlights cut through the darkness once more, illuminating the narrow path ahead, Caleb did not feel the same uncertainty that had followed him before. There was no searching in his thoughts, no restless edge pulling him forward without direction. Instead, there was clarity, simple and steady. And as he drove slowly down the gravel road, leaving the house behind, he reached over and placed the journal carefully on the seat beside him, his hand resting on it for just a moment longer than necessary, as if acknowledging not what it contained, but what it now represented. And Rex shifted slightly, his head turning toward Caleb for a brief second before returning his gaze forward, and Caleb allowed himself a small breath, not heavy, not burdened, but full. And the road ahead stretched into the distance, no longer just a path to somewhere else, but a continuation of something that had already begun. and for the first time in a long while, he did not feel like he was moving away from something, but toward it, guided not by urgency, but by a quiet certainty that whatever came next, he would recognize it when he saw it, just as he had recognized the moment that changed everything. The road carried on beneath a sky that had begun to clear, the last traces of cloud drifting slowly apart to reveal a quiet stretch of stars that seemed closer than usual, as if the night itself had softened, and Caleb drove without rushing, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes no longer scanning for what might come next, but simply following what was already in front of him, and beside him Rex rested with a calm that had not been there before, his body relaxed, his breathing even. The quiet alertness that once defined him now settled into something deeper, something at peace, and the truck moved through miles of open road until the first hint of dawn began to rise along the horizon, a faint line of pale gold breaking through the darkness. And Caleb slowed as he reached a small overlook where the land opened wide, rolling fields, stretching out beneath the early light, untouched and still, and he pulled over without thinking, the engine idling softly as he stepped out into the cool morning air, the ground firm beneath his boots, the silence around him complete in a way that felt different from the night before, not heavy, not waiting, but open, and Rex joined him, stepping to his side, his gaze moving across the horizon as if taking in something larger than distance. And Caleb stood there for a long moment, the journal, held in his hand, its presence no longer unfamiliar, no longer something he questioned, but something he understood without needing to open it again. And as the sun rose higher, casting a warm light across the land, he felt it clearly, not as a thought, not as a decision, but as a knowing, simple and steady, that whatever had been passed to him was not meant to be kept hidden, not meant to remain a story locked away in pages, but something to be lived, something to be carried forward in the same quiet way it had been built, through small choices, through moments that would not seem important to anyone else, but would matter in ways no one could measure. And he exhaled slowly, a breath that felt lighter than any he had taken in years, and Rex stepped closer, brushing against his leg with a quiet reassurance that needed no words, and Caleb looked out once more across the open land, the path ahead no longer uncertain, not because he knew exactly where it would lead, but because he trusted the direction it was already taking him. And as he turned back toward the truck, the morning light catching the edges of everything it touched, he carried with him not just the journal, not just the memory of a single night, but something far greater, something that could not be seen or held, only understood, the quiet truth that sometimes the world does not reward you for what you take, but for what you are willing to give without knowing what will return. And as the engine came back to life and the road stretched forward once again, Caleb did not look back, because he no longer needed to. What mattered was already with him, steady and certain, guiding him forward in ways he did not need to question. And somewhere beneath the rhythm of the road, beneath the quiet hum of the journey ahead, there remained a simple understanding, clear and unshaken, that kindness never disappears. It only waits, patient and unseen, until the moment it finds its way back home.